You're an early 90s Sega kid, and you see this under the tree. So then you take one of your existing games, you kind of, you know, match it up, looks like, yeah, that could be a game. You start feeling the top to see if there's like a hang tab or something like that. Have you done that too? Well, assuming you're the type to get a new Sega Genesis game every year that the console was released, which by the way was like 10 years, what game could you have received for Christmas? Or any gift-giving holiday, I suppose, at the end of the year. How are you feeling? You got John Riggs here. Let's take a look at the games you probably received for Christmas. So I'm looking at the games that were released like in the later part of the year, and looking at the comments on my past two videos for NES and Super Nintendo, there's like, well, it could have been this, could have been that. Sometimes I got a couple of games. So for the benefit of the doubt, on Sega Genesis, let's look at a couple of games that you could have received at the end of the year. In the meantime, I've got these hats for sale with a link below, as well as these fun, unique, nostalgic air fresheners, including this arcade one that smells like an old 1980s arcade, and this one, which smells like a high school cafeteria. Can you believe it? These and more available in my shop in the link below. Starting all the way back in 1989, Revenge of Shinobi. This was on the top of, it should have been on the top of anyone's list, really, for Christmas of 89. Well, I mean, here's hoping that you got a Sega Genesis for Christmas in 1989. It would have included Altered Beast anyway. Gotta have something else to play, though. Love me some Shinobi, and Revenge of Shinobi was just so good. Still one of the best Shinobi games. It might even be the best Shinobi game of everything. If you got your Sega Genesis at launch back in 1989, maybe you had some games on the list. Hopefully, this was one of the ones you received for sure. Now, the game I would have put very high on the list would have been Golden Axe. Only problem was Golden Axe was released literally a few days before Christmas. So the problem with Golden Axe on Christmas is it was also released during a time when there wasn't like definite release dates. It was like, yeah, it's gonna come out sometime around whatever. So although yes, Golden Axe was released December of 1989, oh man, getting this for Christmas would have been a long shot. Not saying it didn't happen. I bet it happened, but it would have been a long shot. I do love me some Golden Axe. Sega Genesis 1990, Strider would have been at the top of my list probably. Loved Strider in the arcade. I was a huge fan of it. I remember first seeing this game in the, it was in an arcade in Santa Cruz, California. We were on vacation once. And I was like, I don't know what this game is, but it looks amazing. What is that weird thing that he's using for a weapon? I didn't realize, oh, that's his sword. He's swinging it so fast that you just see like the blade, you know, the shadow, the swing of the sword kind of thing. I just thought that was a fun idea, and it was just, I loved it. I loved Strider. Released later in the year, 1990, would have been a good one to get. The one that you probably got was Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse, because you can't go wrong with Mickey Mouse. The Mickey Mouse games are always pretty good. Confusing, because you're already so used to Super Mario Brothers to pop on enemies' heads, that with this one you have to jump, and then hit your jump button again, or hit down, to basically attack them. It should have just been a one jump every time you fall down. It could have hurt them, but in this case, you had to initiate the fact that you're actually going to cause damage. Because if you don't, then they'll hurt you. But Castle of Illusion, very, very good. And again, Joe Montana Football was released just a few days before Christmas of 1990. So like Golden Axe, did you get this for Christmas in 1990? It could have happened, but it was released just mere days before Christmas itself. So chances are unlikely, but you still could have got it. 1991 was a great year for Sega Genesis. One of the best. It was the year that Sonic the Hedgehog was released. There was a ton of great games that came out earlier this year as well, mostly in summer into fall. But when it came around Christmas time, then they're like, oh hey, not only do we have Sonic as a mascot character, ToeJam and Earl, I thought were almost like co-mascot characters too. Like they were really building them up to be like the next big, you know, thing. You know, it was the 90s, it was Attitude, and ToeJam and Earl was all about that. So why not ToeJam and Earl? It looked cool. The magazines were really hyping it up. It looked fun enough. Streets of Rage. This is the first one. This one would have been high on the list too. I remember seeing this in magazines saying, oh cool, it looks like Final Fight, which I loved Final Fight. But two-player simultaneous. It just looks gritty and grimy and awesome. That one of the reasons I loved Sega Genesis so much, right? Fun two-player fighting game, great soundtrack. I didn't realize how great the soundtrack was until I finally got around to playing it. And instead of having like a desperation move, like where you just, you know, punch and kick like all around you, in this one, your desperation move is your squad comes up and launches some rocket launcher napalm fire attack or something on the enemies around you. I thought that was kind of fun. What a great game to see under the Christmas tree in 1991 would be Streets of Rage. Christmas of 92, it was all about Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I mean, this came out November, and this was the one that you wanted to play. This was the one. I mean, again, we've had Sonic the Hedgehog now, the first one, for a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half. It valued itself to be the mascot character, and then this one came out. You know that thing where you like give your like little brother or sister the second controller which isn't plugged in? Well, this is the perfect opportunity to keep the controller plugged in because controller 2 plays Tails. And Tails doesn't die. You can just do that and collect all the rings and have Tails be the helper. Absolutely love it. Sonic 2, many people consider this the best Sonic the Hedgehog game. Of all Sonic the Hedgehog games, hard to see an argument in that. Loved the bonus stages as well. This would have been the perfect gift. Or if you're an intellectual, you would have grabbed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. Wanted this one. If you were a Sega kid, you were all about this one because, you know, like Nintendo always had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Then you had the, what was that Super Nintendo one? Not the Manhattan Project. What was that called? Turtles in Time. Hello. So this one was like a little bit different. This was like, hey, you know what? Good for you with your Super Nintendo. We are Sega Genesis. We are one, and we have our own Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. Now, it's basically Turtles in Time with some of the things mixed around a little bit, but still super, super fun. And of course, if you're talking about 1992, you're talking about Streets of Rage 2. This is the one that really established, I think, the Streets of Rage series, although there was only a few Streets of Rage games. The first one, great, fighter, lovely. And then this one rolls around, and you're like, okay, this is the new hotness. They could have just continued doing Golden Axe games. Which they did a few of those too, but it's like, oh, you know what, let's do this kind of side-scrolling Street Fighter brawling style game. And this one, man, this one just perfected it. Loved everything about Streets of Rage 2, can't find a flaw. What a wonderful game to get in 1992. 93 rolls around and we get the ultimate version of Aladdin. This is Disney's Aladdin here on the Sega Genesis, my preferred way to play. Super Nintendo one is fine. This is my favorite version though. The animation on point. The music to this game, straight from basically the sheet music. I still have it. The Aladdin sheet music for piano. And it's just like I could play along with that and listening to the music here. It's the same thing. It was great. Loved Aladdin. I loved the movie anyway. And then this video game was just great. It was just fantastic. I absolutely loved it. But for 1993, you're looking for their own Street Fighter type clone game, and that's when you get Eternal Champions. You know, they already had Street Fighter 2, you already had Mortal Kombat, and now Sega is like, hey, we can do one of those. And that's when you get Eternal Champions. I really wanted to like this game. I didn't like it as much as I should have liked it. I remember when I saw photos, I was like, oh, this is going to be my game. This one's going to be the one for me. And it's okay. It's all right. It does have a couple of unique ideas as far as moves go, where instead of like charging back then forward and punch, you have to hit like 2 buttons instead of just the 1 button or something like that, you know. So as soon as you know your character and know the moves and everything, it's a lot easier. It's been a while since I've really sat down to play this game, you know, and really studied the characters and everything. But Eternal Champions, it was another hyped up game for Sega. So 1993 wouldn't have been a bad thing to see this under the Christmas tree. Oh my goodness, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I remember watching the very first episode of this on Saturday morning and thinking to myself, what did I just watch? It wasn't for me. There's a whole crew of Power Rangers fanatics still today that are super nostalgic for it. It was, for me, I was a junior in high school. I watched it anyway. I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't get it. But the Power Rangers video games have all been pretty decent. And this one for the Sega Genesis was a 2D fighting game, and it was all right. So again, if you're really into Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you're a Sega kid, this is the game that you probably received, and nothing wrong with that. Pretty decent for a 2D fighting game. 1994 also gave us Sonic and Knuckles. You talk about DLC here. The game by itself is a game by itself. It's Sonic and Knuckles. It is its own game. That's pretty cool. The gimmick behind it, however, where you could attach like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, for instance, and you can play through Sonic the Hedgehog 2 as Knuckles, that blew my mind. I didn't even fathom that. I was like, so did they know they were going to do this when they made Sonic the Hedgehog 2? That you could just plug it in and play? I didn't get it. I didn't get it, and I didn't want to get it because it was such a good idea. So 94, definitely the one to get. 94 also saw SpiderMan and Venom at Maximum Carnage. A decent fighting game for the SpiderMan games. I remember this was kind of hyped up a little bit too. I mostly played it on Super Nintendo. I may have played a little bit better on Genesis, I don't know. But I could have seen this under the tree as well. 1995 rolls around, we see Gargoyles. Now Gargoyles was a next level Disney animated series. It wasn't, I mean, it was a cartoon, but it wasn't like DuckTales. It wasn't like Tailspin. It was kind of dark. It was kind of deep. Great idea for an animated series. Was this after, I would think this was after school and not like Saturday morning. I'm pretty sure this was an after school cartoon. But holy moly, what a great cartoon. And the Sega Genesis game brings that same kind of dark vibe that you get with Gargoyles. I loved it. And for Sega Genesis, it worked out really, really well. Absolutely wonderful. That's honestly about the end of it for 1995. 1996, and we're getting stuff like this now on the Sega Genesis. This is awesome for Sega Genesis. Sonic 3D Blast, the name of this game here, came out in 1996. You gotta understand that the PlayStation is already out. The Nintendo 64 came out earlier this year. The Sega Saturn was on store shelves last year, according to this, because that came out in 95. So they're still making Sega games on the Sega Genesis. They're still having support for the Sega Genesis after all these years, even though, you know, most companies are already just kind of doing their own thing. People who are Sega kids were just like, hey, we still got games. Albeit not the best games ever, but something anyway. And Sonic 3D Blast, this is like oh, you want Sonic in 3D? Yeah, we can do that. And then they give you this. Well, it's more isometric than anything, obviously. You can tell that now. But Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Genesis. If Sega is all you had, if the Genesis is all you're rocking, 1996, you probably got this. You probably also grabbed Virtua Fighter 2. It's like, oh, here's a great game in the arcade, wonderful on the Sega Saturn, and now they make a version for the Sega Genesis? That's insane. Well, it was insane. It was more of a 2D fighter than anything. It looked like it should have been 3D, but no, it was like the 3D clunkiness in a 2D form. I would have been okay if it was just like more pixel-based, and I guess this is pixel-based technically, but I would have been more okay with that if it was just like, you know what, let's really make it pixel-based and not try to make it look like the Sega Saturn version. Because then it just makes it look like a bootleg of itself. But Virtua Fighter 2, props for Sega for releasing this on the Sega Genesis. They didn't have to, they did. Alright, so 1997 rolls around. They're still making a couple of games, mostly sports. This title, this opening here, that's actually pretty decent. The Lost World, Jurassic Park. This is the Jurassic Park game based on The Lost World. It plays like those other Jurassic Park games that look like this. Not too bad, not too terrible. Again, all the rest are sports games, so if you're getting a action game for the Sega Genesis in 1997, well, you probably got The Lost World Jurassic Park as your new game of the year. And then the final game, 1998. Again, 1998. You gotta understand, 1998 is when Half-Life was released. 1998 is when Metal Gear Solid was released. Banjo-Kazooie came out in 1998, as well as Frogger for the Sega Genesis. That's right. Same thing. It was like the last game released for the Super Nintendo. It's also the last game released for the Sega Genesis. No, it's not a new version of Frogger. It is the arcade port. The arcade version of Frogger. This game here came out the same year as Metal Gear Solid. This game here came out the same year as Half-Life. There you go. If you're getting a new game, this is, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, this game, Frogger, for the Sega Genesis was the one and only game released that was brand new for the Sega Genesis in 1998. 10 years after the Sega Genesis was released. I also gotta check out these videos too, Nintendo and Super Nintendo games you received for Christmas probably during those consoles' lifespans.